Well, evening everyone. That's a great start. Lovely to see your smiley faces. I'm going to be really either awkward or you're going to love it. I'm going to ask if you don't mind coming to sit a bit closer. Because, well, two reasons. One reason is because whilst we're thinking about welcome, you might be sitting in the seat that you always sit in when you come here. And we all do it because we're creatures of habit. So you've got to put yourselves maybe a bit tonight in what it might feel like for someone who's a newcomer to church. That's my first reason. And second reason is because it's just nicer for me. So I give you free liberty to choose any seat that's a little bit closer. Is that okay?
It's very similar to that.
So you're going to hate me. You might have switched off already because you think, who is this person? But it's a little experiment. No, it's okay. No, don't fill up the first one. No one ever does that. It's a social experiment. It's a social experiment. It's very risky. I might never be invited back. Are people sitting in different seats to where they normally sit? How do you feel? How do you feel? Anyway, as Mike said, my name's Claire, and I go to Christchurch, Chilwell, which is just a bit further along from Beeston. My husband's the vicar there, and I'm the curate, so it's an interesting mix of work and family life. But I'm really delighted actually to have this opportunity to speak about welcome this evening, because actually my name was signed up against number 5 priority of our seasonal visions in our church. And guess what number 5 was? Welcome. So I've been doing a bit of thinking about it, welcome and hospitality. So we've been having that on our agenda. I don't know why it was number 5, but I think there were some other priorities as well. But it's a very important thing to think about. So I'm really, it's fabulous you've got it as a value. It's fabulous that we get a chance to really explore it a little bit tonight. So at our church, so far, since about May, we've begun to sort of change some of the physical infrastructure at the back of church. So we've painted some bits. The back of church is a bit like yours, where everyone, that's where it comes in. That's the sort of the welcome, if you like. So we get a fresh lick of paint. We've got some little nice cafe tables, a sort of bar area where you can serve drinks from. I mean coffee and tea, by the way, not any old drinks. But yeah, just it's a really nice space to come into. It just feels so much more welcoming. So that's what we've done first of all. But very importantly, welcome isn't just about the building, is it? How it looks. It's also about the people. So I'm hoping I can recycle what I say tonight to say to my church at some point, as we gather people who will begin to be part of, yes, a welcome team, but also just more broadly in the church as we think about welcome. Because as we'll discover tonight, spoiler alert, we're all welcomers. So I've only recently done theology training. So I've only been a curate for a couple of years. So before that I was doing a couple of years studying. And one of my assignments was to compare and contrast different styles of worship. And part of that work sent us to a website called Mystery Worshipper, which sounds interesting, doesn't it? But it's a site where people basically, you're writing it down to look it up. It's interesting, you should. It's a site basically where volunteers go and look around churches, and they're basically assessing churches on all sorts of different criteria. How long the sermon was, how good the tea was, whether there were toilets, how many hymns were sung, how the organist played, all this sort of thing. It's very good, but I think it's possibly also really healthy maybe for churches as well, because it also puts a mirror up to the church and says, actually, this is how some people perceive the church service. I haven't been on recently. I don't even know if St James's Porchester is on there. Do you know, Mike? Don't know. You might have a mystery worshipper one Sunday in your midst. So anyway, part of this assignment meant that I did go to a few different churches. I went to a really rural church where worship was outside and in a big barn. And then I also went to a very high Anglo-Catholic church. And of course, as you can imagine, not just the worship was different, but the welcome was different. The welcome is different in all of those places. And I bet you've got your own stories, because I bet this isn't the only church that you've been to. You've got your own stories of what welcome is like. And just from the outset, I am no expert here either. I've just been having a look at the Bible, what it says, talking to other people, reading a few books. So I'm just sharing what I've been discovering over the past few months. But I am really passionate about welcome. That's what I've discovered over the past few months. Particularly because as we begin to realise what welcome is, we begin to step in to be more the people that God has made us to be those that are overflowing with his love into the world. And that's our ultimate calling, is to overflow with the love of Jesus and to share that with our world. So you've got a little handout in front of you. That's just a bit of a roadmap to show you where we're going this evening. I've got 3 main questions. Not rocket science, but what is welcome, who welcomes, and where does welcome start? And I'm sure there's many other things, and hopefully we'll have some time to discuss things together, and you can have a chance to think about other things around welcome. But they're my 3 questions, and that's where we go. So firstly, what is welcome? Most churches I know want to be a welcoming church. The thing is often we can reduce welcome in our minds to a smile, or just a handshake, or just a welcome pack shoved in someone's hand on a Sunday morning. Nothing wrong with those things, but it's so much more than that. And I've been looking at Paul's words in Romans 15, verse 7, which you've got on you, and they give such a deeper and more rich understanding of welcome. Paul writes, "Welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God." So a Christian welcome from this verse is rooted in the example of Christ. Think about it for a minute. Christ welcomed us when we were sinners, when we were enemies, when we were strangers to him. That's the wonderful story of the cross. Christ's welcome welcomed all of us. Whatever background, whatever situation we'd come in, whatever was going on in our hearts, Christ welcomed us by dying for us and reconciling us to God. Not only that, but making us his sons and daughters, drawing us in to his family so that we can call him Abba, Father, Daddy, have a personal relationship. I learnt this verse, Revelation 3:20, which is also on your sheet, as a child. "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him, and they with me." We're welcome to sit at his table. That's a really close sort of way of being drawn in, isn't it? To sit around a table, to share a meal. And that's how Jesus welcomes us into that intimate space. Such a profound, powerful display of hospitality. So, just to put it really simply, if we are called to welcome one another, we're called to welcome like Christ welcomes us. So, if you've been welcomed by his love and grace, if you felt that in your hearts and you said yes to Jesus, then welcome is much more than those superficial gestures, the handshake and the smile. I don't think Jesus ever handed out hymn books, but that's also a helpful way of making people know what's happening in this. It's interesting too that actually Paul was writing at the time to Jews and Gentiles. There was huge tension in the church at the time. And so it's, again, just a reminder that welcome is so radical, that it crosses boundaries and barriers and bias. It just transcends all culture and all language and all difference, all for the glory of God. So, if you've welcomed Christ into your heart, then you have that amazing, powerful grace of his to offer that welcome to others. And that's actually quite a high bar, isn't it? If we're to welcome in the way that Christ welcomed us. It's quite a high bar. I remember coming home from university once, and it was in my first year, and it'd been a sort of a long term. I remember driving up the drive to my parents' house, and I remember looking in, and the door actually was slightly ajar, so there was some sort of warm light coming out. And they've got a little conservatory, so there was some Christmas lights, and they were sort of twinkling. And as I got out of the door, there was this amazing roast cooking. It was just sort of coming at me in the cold winter air. And I could see the table had been set, and there was laughter. I could already hear like great chat coming. And it was so inviting. It was so welcoming. It was exactly what I needed at the time. And I got through the door, and I put my bags down, and I was hugged by my family, I was embraced, and I was just sat around that table. And it was just the most amazing feeling of love and comfort. It was like, I've come home. Have you ever had an experience like that? Where you've been so drawn in and so welcomed, perhaps with friends, perhaps with family, perhaps even, dare I say it, at church. But you probably do this. As I say, it's not rocket science. Probably you do this in your homes. You know, if you have someone over, you make some preparations. You take time to go to the shops to choose the food. Maybe you buy some flowers to make the house look nice. I make my husband do the hoovering. He bought a hoover that's really powerful, and I find it really hard. It's just too strong. So I make him do the hoovering and plump up the cushions. And some of you are laughing. Maybe you get made to do the hoovering too. All right. We all know what it feels like to be welcomed, don't we? Even if not necessarily at church, at a restaurant or a theatre or a club that you go to. And I don't just mean that sort of physical warmth and delicious sort of food kind of welcome, but a welcome where you're really valued, where you're seen, where you're really heard and listened to. Like that day that I came home from university, I just knew that I'd come home. It's like a refuge. It's just a real comforting place to be. And yes, it was with my family, but they're not always easy, as we know. But it was like a Christ-like welcome. A lot of effort had gone into making that a really special time of welcoming me home. Jesus writes in Matthew 25, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you invited me. You clothed me. I was ill, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Some of those things are quite challenging, aren't they? So, in that context of a family welcome, that might seem easy. Might not. But there might be times when it's easy to welcome with good friends coming around to your house. You know that they love you and they're going to accept you, but it might be hard when we perhaps have to give of our things or of ourselves in those situations for someone hungry or ill. Again, it's that sort of costly welcome that Jesus says. Elsewhere he says, love your neighbour as yourself. That's everyone. So I think I'd go as far as say, welcome is a way of life. Welcome is a way of life to everyone. Whatever background, whatever class, whatever race, whatever gender, whatever socioeconomic background, it's a way of life that reflects the character of Christ and brings glory to God. And you know what, as we do that, I reckon it will transform our churches from just places of worship to places and communities of grace that just, as I said at the beginning, overflow with Jesus' love into the world. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. So if we become those people of light, we will shine in the darkness, and people will be attracted and drawn to Jesus. Archbishop William Temple says, the church is a community that exists for the benefit of those who are not yet its members. So as you walked here, as you drove here, they're the people that we want to shine to. They're the people that we want to be Christ to welcome. So our welcome needs to be full of grace. Just like Jesus, embracing the marginalised, befriending those that the world has rejected, and inviting the weary to come and find rest. So it's challenging, isn't it? It's costly. But we do it because Jesus has first welcomed us in the most extraordinary way. So that's what is welcome. And I thought it might be nice at this point for you guys maybe to turn to the person next to you or around you, wherever you're sitting, and just have a look at a couple of questions. So I think they're on the last page in the booklet that I gave you, maybe the third page. The third page. So I've written it, and it's called Breakout Questions. So we will have some time, I think, like you have in other weeks, to discuss in a bit more detail, perhaps at the end. But I just thought it might be nice just to pause for a moment before we look at our next two questions. So is that the best thing to do for them to turn next to you? Yeah? Turn to the person next to you, okay, and have a think. What's your personal experience of welcome in this church? Be careful what you say. Or other community places. And then what are the ways we can enhance the experience of the newcomer and make them feel welcome? Is that okay? So we'll have about five minutes on that. There weren't too many horror stories. But you know, horror stories can help us to make better stories, can't they? You know, this is, you know, what we were doing tonight, you know, talking about this value and having opportunity to discuss is really just the beginning, isn't it? Hopefully you'll go on and keep on talking about these things in the days and weeks ahead and sharing them with people who aren't here tonight so that you can all begin to own these values, because this is going to be who you are as a church, what you embody and what you sort of show to the world. So, we've done what is welcome. The next one is who welcomes. And we've thought about this a little bit already, but I just want to expand on it. So, to help us understand this question, I've got another question. Would you consider yourself a guest or a host in this church? Assuming you will regularly come to this church, would you consider yourself a guest or a host? Because there's a big difference between those two roles. You know, if you were to come to my house, I would be the host and you would be the guest. And I'd do my utmost to ensure that you had everything you needed. You had a drink, you had some food. And that guest and host relationship is very much at play. Perhaps until we got to know each other to such a point that there's some people I know that just literally just come through the door and make themselves a cup of tea. But let me just ask this question, leading on from whether you think you're a guest or a host. Could you be sure this coming Sunday that any stranger who walks into your church building would be well hosted by a regular member of the congregation? It's a tricky question, isn't it? I don't mean just sort of the welcome team. I mean any member of your congregation. And the point really, at the heart of all of this, is that who welcomes is a job for us all. Right from the smallest baby to the oldest member here. It's no use the welcome team at the back giving the very best welcome and greeting everyone brilliantly as they step through the door, if everyone else ignores that person. Because there's much more to your family, your church. I'm looking out and you all look lovely. And if I was living around here, I'd definitely like to come to this church because you all just seem so lovely. But there's so much more, isn't there, than just coming through the door. We're all people that have so many interesting things to share, so many ways we can encourage, so many different gifts and skills to share. We need everybody in the church family to welcome. You see, if no one talks to that visitor, that person who comes for the first time, they won't come back. Maybe that's been some of your stories, churches that you've been to. So let me ask that question again. Are you a guest or a host in this congregation? Because it's possible that some who may have been here for many years, or 1, 2, 5, 10 years, we might still have the mentality of a guest. And I just say that to just help us to think, not to sort of point any fingers, but just to help us to think that actually, if we've been here and we call ourselves part of this church family, then we are hosts, all of us are hosts, all of us are welcomers. And you might say, well, I just can't, I'm not very good at making conversation. Well, maybe that's not what you do as a welcomer. Maybe you're the smiler. Or maybe you're the person that just ensures that all the cups are out and the tea is to a brilliant standard, or there's chocolate biscuits at the back. They were very nice, by the way. In the story of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10, I hope you probably do know that story, probably don't need to read it. It shows us what the role is as a welcomer. And just to continue to expand this, it's not a matter of status, it's not a matter of position or privilege, but it's a matter of our hearts. That's what we've been saying all along. If we have Jesus' grace and love in us, then we will want to show that. And as if we were to look at that story, we would see 3 different people who encounter the wounded man on the road. So you have the priest and the Levite, both religious leaders, belonging to God's chosen people. They had authority, they had responsibility and the opportunity to welcome the man in need. They should have done something because of their position. But they both avoided and ignored him. They didn't show kindness or hospitality or compassion. But, as we know, by contrast, the Samaritan, the outsider, someone despised and rejected, well, he had no obligation, no expectation, no incentive to welcome the man in need. And yet he went out of his way to care for him, to show him love and mercy. And by the way, the character that often gets missed out here is the innkeeper, because he cared for a long time and showed hospitality for this man. So, as I looked at that story this past week, it really reminded me that welcome isn't about our role or our title or membership or how long we've been in church for. But welcome is just purely something that we do because of our love for Jesus. As we said at the very beginning, we welcome because Jesus welcomed us. I know I've said it a few times already, haven't I? But it's all about the cross. It's all about Jesus. It all comes back to him. His love is the thing that transforms us to show that welcome. And everyone is welcomed by God. Even this wounded man is welcomed by those people. God doesn't show favouritism, does he? It's important that all of us play our part in that. And sometimes, as I said, it might just be the very small gestures. You're sitting here and you're an introvert. But I want to say that you are a welcomer. You are part of this family. And you can show God's love to other people who perhaps don't want to be pounced on and talked to and introduced to loads of people, because we're all completely different. And how people come through the church and what they need in that moment, you just might be that person who says nothing but just listens. And they would have felt valued and loved and seen. And by the way, I don't think it's just about welcomers. I mean, not to put the cat amongst the pigeons, but do you all know each other here? Do you know everyone's name here? Do you welcome each other as brothers and sisters in Christ, not just newcomers? Your value is we are welcoming. Are you welcoming to each other? I find that's quite a challenge if I think about my church family. I don't know everyone's name. And for some people knowing the name, that can be really significant, can't it? I try really hard on a Sunday to remember people's names. Sometimes I go home at lunch and just write it on my phone to try and remind myself for the next Sunday. If you've got that gift, keep that gift, because names are good, aren't they? It's really helpful. People really feel seen and valued with that. A number of years ago, father-in-law, he's a vicar. My whole of my husband's family are all vicars. His brothers are vicars, his fathers are vicars now. It's a hazard of becoming a tough mum. But anyway, one Sunday, a number of years ago, he was preaching on welcome. And he asked a member of the church congregation who'd been away on holiday for a number of weeks, he asked him to come to church, essentially looking a bit like a homeless man. So it'd been a few weeks, he'd grown a big beard, he looked a bit dishevelled, he just got out some smelly old clothes, was just a bit dirty, had some sort of, crisp packets and other things sort of hanging off him. And you can perhaps guess what my father-in-law was intending to do. So this man, who's a regular, wasn't recognised at all. And he came and he sat down in church, and oh my word, the reaction of the people was priceless. People moved away. People avoided him. No one went and said hello. No one offered him a cup of tea or coffee. So when it came to the sermon, my father-in-law didn't have to say very much because it had already spoken so clearly to the whole congregation. And he began to sort of take off his dirty clothes, and people were like, oh my goodness. It was a pack and punch. The point was made. It was very, very clear. So whoever comes through our doors, whoever joins as saying, I want to be part of this church, we are to welcome and to love as Christ would have done. In that scenario, what would Jesus have done in that church? Oh, it's really hard, isn't it? It's really hard. All that to say, whether you're someone who feels like they can show that welcome or not, I just want to encourage you to keep on reading and looking and learning about Jesus, because the more we do that, actually the more we will fall in love with Jesus and want to like him in this place and in our lives. And also, I don't want to diminish the actual, when I say who welcomes, it is everybody, but I don't want to diminish the actual natural gifting and calling that some of you will have on that sort of front of house, first contact, welcome role. I think, and I reckon it might be less than this, but the book I was reading says, first impressions are made within 30 seconds. I reckon it might be shorter than that, particularly in our sort of instant social media age. But 30 seconds isn't very long for people to make an impression. So I do want to say that actually, if you feel that welcome hospitality is your gifting, then do step up and be part of that team to help make the very best impression for people who come through these doors. And perhaps I think there's some questions to discuss that at the end. But one particular book I was reading by a guy called Michael Harvey suggested you could divide the first impressions people get from church into 4 areas, which I think are on your sheet. Greeted. So we knocked the smile a bit, didn't we, at the beginning? We said it's not just about a smile. But that's a great start, isn't it? Because it conveys a lot. So, greeting with a smile. Might not have happened for someone throughout their day or their week. They might have had a really tough time. So, to be welcomed, to be greeted with a smile. Secondly, directed. So, simply and politely, shown where to go. I mean, I imagine, and I'm not a nervous flyer, but can you imagine what it's like to get on an aeroplane and you're nervous and you've got to fly somewhere? I mean, that kind of feeling might be what it's like. We all know what it feels like really to go into a new place, don't we? But just up that a little bit, if you're a nervous flyer and about to sort of go on a flight. That first sort of moment in the building, it's crowded, or there's lots of noise, that kind of thing. Just being someone who directs, someone who points people to, that's where the toilets are, that's where children can be, that this is the space where we are today. Thirdly, treated. So, I was treated. Tick on the welcome. I was treated with a really nice chocolate biscuit about there and a cup of tea. So yeah, doing food, doing hospitality, doing that kind of thing really is a great way of just showing people that they're welcome. I'd like to be a church also that does chocolate muffins. I mean, I haven't really had this out of the vicar. But I did go to a church once where you got a chocolate muffin in the morning, and I thought that would be good. Don't know what the budget is for that. That's just my personal preference. So treated, and lastly, seated. Just led to a comfortable seat, perhaps where there's, where it's space and it's convenient for that person to be. But with that, I would also say, introducing them to someone that is around them. So they don't feel lost and alienated. So someone can guide them through the service or point out what's happening next if they look a bit confused. So they're not just sat all on their own, but they're seated next to someone who will help them. Because we're all welcomers. So that was who welcomes. Lastly, before we get some time to really discuss this a little bit more, where does welcome start? I love when I chat to newcomers on Sunday, I love to ask them, how did you hear about Christ Church? That's our church. And I think particularly over this last year, and it may be post-COVID pandemic, everybody, I can't think of anyone, everybody that I've spoken to has already seen our church online. I don't know if I think your sermons maybe go online, or does your whole church service go online? Live stream, there you go. So people, where does the welcome start? Well, it might have started and you don't even know it. It started in their homes, it started on their iPads. They're already beginning to make their first impressions of what church is like, what it's like to come here. So the question of where welcome starts, well, that is a tough one, isn't it? It's a really tough one. So it could be online. I'm afraid it was dark, so I've got no idea what your notice board said, but it might be as people go up and down your street, looking at the boards out there, what does the church notice board say about this community here? We thought about it a while ago, so I don't know if you've been to Christchurch Children, there's a hall next door and there's some little parking bays. And there was quite a severe big sign. I don't know if it's still there now, but there was a lot of discussion at one staff meeting once about the fact that this sign said church parking only. And it was true, we did kind of need some space on a Sunday. But what did that say to the community that lived around that street? That we've had some conversation with some residents. So it's just interesting, isn't it? You might want to, I don't know, I'm thinking off the top of my head, but you might like to talk to people around the area. What do you notice as you come down our street? What does our church say to you? And it will say different things to different people at different times, I'm sure. But that might be interesting. We've also got a quite big sort of church garden in front, where actually lots of people walk into Beeston. It's a bit of a thoroughfare to get the tram or to go to work. And I'm very grateful. We've got a fantastic grass cutting team. So they ensure that the grass is well mowed and kept to a decent level, because that would again convey something, if there's lots of rubbish and that sort of thing in the garden, that might say something about our welcome. But I think most importantly is the point that welcome is you. And so welcome starts wherever you are. So how do you talk about church? How do you talk about what you're doing on a Tuesday evening when someone says you're going off to your home group or you're going to church, something? How often do you invite people in to this place or to your home when you talk about church? Welcome starts outside of this building. As welcome and lovely as it is in here with these lovely lights, and I've never been in this church, it's beautiful. It's a really lovely converted barn, isn't it? You've got some really lovely, it's a really lovely welcoming space. But actually welcome probably starts with you, with your friends, with those you meet, and how you engage and talk to them about church. So that's kind of welcome as you come into church. Let's not forget about where welcome starts in the pews as well. What's it like for someone who's come to church? I don't know how you do your service. I'm guessing it's with the screen, but some churches you can have piles and piles of books to work through. You don't know what page you're on or what's going on. And, that's not very welcoming. And I think sometimes we can have this crazy language that's just so normal to us. But if you're not a local, it can be so alien and so strange. You're coming into like a completely different country sometimes when you come into some churches. So we need to think about that during the service. And then, of course, after the service is key as well, isn't it? To how the conversation continues, to how many biscuits and coffees, and also not just the physical sort of food, but also what else can you invite someone to? Who else can you introduce them to? what happens after the service is really important. We also have in our church welcome packs that contain all sorts of things about the vision and value of the churches, and perhaps a little bit about what's happening in the local area. But in the past, we've also put within these welcome packs a bar of chocolate. And that's just a real treat, but also it's a way of making them realise that we want to go above and beyond. And it just goes back to what we said before. If Jesus has welcomed us in such a costly, wonderful way, then we want to exceed expectations and show that love to others. So yeah, in our welcome pack, there's chocolate. So if you came, you get a bar of chocolate in our welcome pack. I realise I'm emphasising chocolate quite a lot this evening. I'm more of a salt really good crisp person, just for the record. But I do like chocolate. So I'm coming in to finish. We're going to have a chance to discuss things. And I want to finish with this question. How might welcome, this incredible value that we've looked at, how might welcome change in church if we believed that God had sent the person who came through the door? It's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think that people just wake up on a Sunday morning and think, I know, I'm going to go to that church. It's not an accidental thing for people to come and cross the thresholds of our church. It's highly significant. I would go even as far as saying it's a holy moment. That God has a purpose in bringing people to you, to this place. And we should recognise it as such. So, realising how much God loves every human being and what God did through Christ will help us recognise the preciousness of every single person that comes across this threshold here, whatever their differences. As Paul says in Romans, welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God. So that was it. What is welcome? Who welcomes? And where does welcome start? And I've got a little passage which you might like to turn to in your Bibles as you go into discussion groups. Quite a short passage to read with some questions. But do make sure you've got time as well to have a think about this couple of practical questions. What does welcome look before, during and after? And even after Sunday. Is that a good one? That's it. All right. Let's chat.